Evolution community, welcome back to our podcast. I'm so glad you joined us today. Let's talk about it.
Hey, let's talk about it, listeners. Welcome back for another amazing episode with a special guest. We are excited to introduce you today to Mrs. Alli Patterson. She's from Cincinnati, Ohio. How are you today, Alli?
Oh, I'm great. Thanwhat for having me on.
Yes.
Great to be with you.
Yes, we're so excited. So we did find Alli because she's the author of a book, How to Stay Standing. But what drew us to her was her story, and knowing that so many of you in our audience, you come here, you come to our YouTube, you come to our podcast because you're wanting to hear stories of redemption, stories of restoration, stories of how to with singleness, sex, marriage, dating. And so Alli is going to share parts of her story with us today. Might need headphones for a little if you're listening with little kids around. So just your fair share warning of what we're going to be talking about. But we're just so thankful for you, Alli, and we're so excited to hear your story.
Great. Oh, yeah. It is, woo. Every time I talk about it, I feel it all over again. So I'm ready to go.
Yeah. So tell us, you get us started, kick us off. You guys, this is actually the fun part for me is sometimes when I get to meet guests on here and I'm like, I don't know it. So I'm going to be front row with the popcorn with you listening to the story. So I'm really excited. Thanks for being willing to share.
Of course. Well, if you met me today, like you said, I'm actually a teaching pastor today. So if you met me today, you would probably think that I had some squeaky clean past, but that is actually not the case.
Isn't that funny? I'm gonna go there for a second with you. I love that. Sure. And that's why what's so funny is being pastors and then being female pastors who preach and teach, you're like, it's so funny because I remember there's so many moments where I'll share my story and that's the exact assumption is like, oh my gosh. And it's so fun to see the hope it brings to people who thought they were already disqualified because of their lives, especially females. Like I love seeing women and girls be like, oh my gosh, wait, like you've been through this type of stuff, but then you're still have this authority, have this healing, have this wholeness. So I just love that you started with that because I think that's such a funny thing where you're like, yeah, if you just turn this YouTube on right now and looked at you, you're like, oh, she's this amazing professional author. There's no way she's been through anything hard. You're like, what? Of course, we all have. We're human.
Yes. And I think especially when you're in the church, a lot of times we want to put that kind of perfection on people. But if you read through the New Testament, my goodness, there were all kinds of people preaching the gospel that did not have squeaky clean paths.
Yes.
And I think the amazing part of that is when you're free with your story, it frees other people
100%.
Immediately. You don't even have to attempt to free them. Your being story. Brave enough to tell your story frees people because it just acknowledges like our humanity. We have shared humanity and none of us are living a perfect life.
Yes, I absolutely love that. It's funny. I'm reading through the Old Testament right now and I'm reading through David's stories, obviously with Bathsheba and all this stuff. And then what's funny is that I'm reading it chronologically. So you're getting the Psalms that he wrote during these times. And it was like, because of my integrity, you like blessed me. And I'm like, what integrity? You know, you're like, wait, aren't we in the same couples like months here of the same transgression? You know, you're like, wow. But it's just so cool because you do see the beautiful forgiveness of God that you're like, this is wild, Lord. Like, because it did. Like, then the Lord says, like, yeah, I blessed you because of your righteousness. I'm like, wow, God, you're so cool.
Well, that's such a cool phrase that you brought up because one of the things I learned in the heart of sort of the worst time in my life is that having integrity before God is the most important thing.
Wow.
It is the most important thing. And that really was the driver for me when I found myself at the lowest place, which I'll go back to in just a second. But my drive to get out of that place was because I could feel the lack of peace that comes with a lack of integrity before God. And I think David was a similar character. I love him because he would quickly want to return to integrity before God, even when he made his mistakes, even when they were terrible mistakes. He wanted peace with God. And that was, I love when I see someone, no matter what state their life is in, when what they're after is peace with God. I know you're moving in the right direction if that's what is motivating you. And that's very, very much what motivated me in my lowest moments, because I never lost that sense of that lack of integrity, that lack of peace with God really bothered me. Like to my deepest core, and
Wow.
and praise God for that, because it definitely is what got me out. So if you have that, I would say praise God, because we don't want to lose that sense of being bothered by that lack of integrity before God. And if you're stirred up and you lack peace before God, let that propel you to a different place, because that definitely is what got me to a different place.
Wow, that's so
So
cool.
I'll rewind for you so you kind of know where I'm coming from. Like, I did grow up in the Midwest. I was like a pretty classic Midwestern kid. I really did try to like do the right thing. I thought I built my life the right way. I worked hard. I went to college, found a nice guy. We got married. Like, I got a corporate job. I thought that I had all of my ducks in a row. I thought I had built my life correctly. And to me, building your life well meant, although I wouldn't have said it like this at the time, it meant the external things were in place. And what I did not realize is that while all of those external things were in place, there was a lot internally that wasn't.
Wow.
But I didn't really think about that. I think we live, when the things on the outside of our life are going well, we don't really think about the internal things that aren't. We kind of close one eye and go like, I'm fine. I'm not any worse than the next guy,
Yep.
But it's those places, those soft spots internally that really, really matter in the end. And so here I was, like, I had built, I had a career, and I had a very young marriage, and I was doing it, I'm doing it. I'm making money. I'm traveling. I'm doing my life the way I thought I was supposed to do it, all the things. And the corporate environment I was in was a lot. It was a lot for me in my young 20s. I had a job that most people would have coming out of grad school. So I was around a lot of, slightly older people, much more, they'd lived a little bit longer than me. And I was very naive, and I did not really understand some of the things that I was facing in that environment. And again, that's why character matters, right? It totally matters. And so I got myself into a situation at work where I was having an affair with an older man that I worked with. And I couldn't make sense of the person looking back at me in the mirror.
Wow.
Because I had always been this, what I would have called a good person. And it was really hard for me to reconcile, like, this person that I was being versus the person that I wanted to tell myself that I was. And I think a lot of us have those two people, right? We view ourselves one way, and our behavior might say something a little bit different about us.
Yeah.
And so I'm in this relationship, and it's eating me from the inside out. And I believe now, looking back, that was a gift. The level at which I was bothered by the dissonance, the incongruity, the terrible wrong that I knew I was living versus who I always thought I would be.
Wow.
And I could not reconcile the two. And I walked by the mirror one day, and this was like a major moment with God, where it was that kind of brutal honesty. Sometimes I talk about this moment before I tell you about it, and people will say, "Oh, don't talk bad about yourself." I'm like, I'm not talking bad about myself. All I did was tell the truth. And I walked by the mirror, and I stopped and looked in the mirror at that person. And I told you, it was like, who are you? And I just started talking to God. And I was looking in the mirror at myself going, God, I'm a liar. Like, I'm a deceiver. I'm an adulterer. I'm a terrible friend. I'm a terrible wife. I'm a terrible employee. Like, it was just this breakthrough moment where I went, this is who you're being, regardless of who you thought you were, regardless of who you want to be in your mind. Sure, you're still nice to your friends. Good for you. Something has gone very wrong. And for me, it was very much an inside out thing. I had blind spots that I just did not see. And when I got into an environment where I needed a strength of character to get through it as a person of integrity, I just didn't have it. I did not have the character to sustain where my life had gone.
Wow.
I had too much access, too much money, too much independence, and I did not have the character to support it. And that really is how I allowed myself to get in that situation. I was entirely about what I wanted in the moment. And I had no greater vision for who I was being.
Wow.
No real picture of a woman of integrity. And I just had that really honest moment with God in the mirror. And that was in the midst of a time where I felt God pushing into my life. I don't know if you've ever felt like this. Maybe some of your listeners will know what I mean. It's kind of a funny thing to describe, but I was in this time period in my life where everywhere I looked, everywhere I turned, it was like something about Jesus. Somebody at work gives me a book. Some church down the road has a series that, seems right that I should go and listen to. Like everywhere I turned, and I felt this squeezing, like God was like pushing into my life. And I felt that. I recognized something was going on with God. And that's, I think, why I had these few moments that turned out to be really critical for trying to go a new direction. And probably the breakthrough moment was when I'm a runner. I love to run. I still love to run. And I was out on a run one day and I hit my knees. I like fell to the sidewalk. I could still take you there. It's probably 8 miles from where I'm sitting right now. It was right in front of somebody's house. I was like that crazy woman. You're like, what is that girl doing? I had been crying as I was running down the street, talking to God. And I didn't even know these moments at the time. I didn't know that every time I spoke to him, it was like encouraging him to come a little closer, to squeeze in a little harder, And so I'm running down the street, I'm crying, I'm talking to God. I don't know how to get out of this. I don't want this anymore. I don't want a life like this. This feels awful. I don't want this anymore, but I'm trapped. A lot of times I think we do become trapped in the enormity of our sin. And we think, look at all the things that are going to fall if I try to get out of this now.
Wow.
And that's where I was. I felt desperate, but trapped. And I hit my knees and on this spot on the sidewalk. And I just cried out to him. And I said, I'm done. I can't live like this anymore. And I prayed 2 words that probably to this day, most dangerous prayer I've ever prayed. I said, break me. Break me. Do whatever you have to do. Get me out. And the reason it felt dangerous to pray that is because I had this growing recognition that God is alive and active. If I pray that, he's going to believe me. He's going to consider that an invitation.
Wow.
To come into my life. And I kind of knew that. And so when I prayed those words, I knew something would happen. I had this deep sense that he would do something. And oh my goodness, did he ever. Within 2 to 3 weeks after that, I had a day where I knew, you need to go home right now and confess this relationship to your husband. Don't let another day pass. It was just this strong compulsion. Within 2 to 3 days after that, the relationship was exposed at work. And I did not end up being fired. No moral high ground. I just was low enough in the company where the technical grounds for firing someone is a misuse of company resources, right? I didn't really have a lot at my fingertips at that point,
Right.
And so technically I didn't meet the grounds for being fired, but I might as well have been. You don't keep that quiet for long in a corporate environment, right? It just ruins you, absolutely ruins you. And so all of this is revealed within a short period of time. And I felt like my life was in pieces around my ankles.
Wow.
I felt like it just like a match got lit and it just burned to the ground. And yet I felt a sense of peace and relief only before God. I had no peace and no relief in any other part of my life. I was a wreck.
Yeah.
And I was losing weight. I was anxious. I couldn't sleep. I mean, I was all the things that you might expect for someone whose life is falling apart. But the only place I was at peace was with God. I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt from this point forward, now whatever I have is what you give back to me, is what it's what's real. It's what I get to keep, because everything, I've pretty much ruined everything. And to this day, sometimes I ask myself, how did I do that? Like, how did I throw all my eggs in his basket? Like, where did the guts to do that really come from? And that's where, again, not me is the answer to that question. Because I had been living a selfish, cowardly life. And yet, as he pushed into my life, he also gifted me some things to get through that time of real collapse.
Wow.
And I felt the presence of God in that, like maybe like I never have again. Because he was so near. I was so aware that he was present in all this. And so now I look back on even this acute few weeks to a month, right around when all of that was kind of coming down. And there's a little part of me that goes, oh, God was so near. I was so aware of his presence. It's a huge blessing to have memories of God being tangibly near to you.
Yeah.
Because that's not the case for the most of our average days that we live in our life. We don't all sense him all the time, super up close like that. But boy, I sure did. During that time, I experienced some things of the Holy Spirit that I didn't even have language for at the time. But I beyond a shadow of a doubt knew this is the work of God in my life. And so wherever he's going, it's better than where I've been.
Wow.
Even if I lose something, even if I never get my reputation back, my good job back, my husband at that point, I did not know whether he would stay or go. You know, if I lose all of those things, it will be better. It would be better than living this life.
Wow.
And that's why when we started talking about integrity before God, I really sparked to that idea, because if I hadn't desired that, why else would you ever do what I did?
Yeah.
Why else? There has to be. So one of the first prayers, like if someone's caught in a mess in their life, and of course we all do to varying degrees, get caught in messes, the first thing I want to know is, what do you want? What are you trying to save? Because we sometimes hold on trying to save other things. We want to save our marriage, save our jobs, save our kids from finding out, save our, whatever, save our reputation, save our bank account. We want to save those things. And God can give any of that back that he wants to. But the one thing you cannot fake in front of him is, do you really want God more than you want any of those things? Because he could give any of them back. He can save any of them that he wants. But if you don't go to him because you want him, none of that matters anyway.
Wow.
None of it's going to matter anyway.
Wow.
So I consider it a gift truly of the Holy Spirit. I don't know why God gifted me the courage and faith to do some of the things that happened during that time. But I remember telling him one time, okay, I don't really know what to do here. Like, everything's a mess. I'm just going to start telling the truth to anyone who asks me anything. I'm just going to tell the truth. Because I didn't know another way out. And I was like, I don't know how to put these pieces together. I don't know how to hold on to this all by myself. So whatever anybody asks God, I'm just going to tell them the truth. You should have seen some of the faces. Now it kind of makes me want to laugh just a little bit, only just a little bit. All these years later, it kind of makes me want to laugh. Because when they interviewed me at work, it was a big corporate environment. So of course HR was involved. That's the last person you want to see, by the way, when you're in this kind of a situation.
Yeah.
And she's asking me all these questions, and I was just told her the truth. And her face, she was like,
she's probably like, I can't believe you're actually telling me. I'm the person you don't tell. Don't you know that?
Exactly. You're gonna make up a story and just tell that story, you know. And I was just like, boom, I'm just going to tell her the truth, God. I don't know how to handle this any other way.
Yeah.
But those were all conversations I was having with the Lord.
Yeah.
I was going like, what do I do? I don't know what to do. Okay. I guess I'm just going to tell the truth. It feels like that would make sense to you. Does that seems good to you? You like the truth? I'll just start telling the truth. So this is when I think I went from believing in Jesus to just trying to believe him.
Wow.
Instead.
Yeah. Wow.
And at some point we have to make that shift to mentally assent to the right set of beliefs is not going to be enough for you in the end. You need a living experience with a living God, or you're not going to be a Christian very long.
Yeah.
Because we all need more than the bullet points on a piece of paper.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yep.
Like,
yeah,
we need a God that can handle the kind of messes that we make. And I feel very fortunate now to have had an early experience like that in my faith, because it informed everything I believed about God from that point forward.
Wow.
I've always believed he's for me. Like, do you know how long it takes some people to just believe that God is good and he's for them?
Right. Mm-hmm.
I get how hard that is. I never doubted it because I saw it with my own two eyes.
Yeah.
I was the worst person I knew, and God was for me.
Wow.
He was for my recovery. He was for my marriage. He was for my healing. He was for me. So now I just carry that understanding of God. I do understand when people struggle because they don't feel they've experienced the goodness of God. But boy, for me, it was just inextricably linked to a total mess in my life that I experienced that goodness. And now I just carry with me some of those experiences and understandings. You know, once you go through something truly a living experience with Jesus, you can't unknow that.
Yeah.
You can't talk somebody out of something they actually own because they lived it.
Yeah.
So that was the origin of I would say my adult faith was that complete disaster of a time in my life. And the way out, is where I experienced a lot of the Jesus that I then later began to read about in the Bible and study more intentionally. I eventually left my corporate career for a job in ministry, and thank goodness there are actual communities of believers out in the wild, out in the church that don't expect you to live a perfect life.
Yeah.
And so I have been in a community that accepts messy stories and makes room for the gospel, which is redemption, right?
Yep.
So, then my marriage, we actually just had our 24th wedding anniversary yesterday.
Wow, that's amazing.
Which is so cool. But, it was a long, messy way out. And later on, we've tripped over some of those scars. You don't get out of that easy, everything. It matters to everything. Trust and sex and communication. And I mean, intimacy on every level. I mean, we've fought for years to get back what was damaged in that time so early on in our marriage.
Wow.
And that's rough.
Yeah.
Nobody wants that.
Yeah.
Nobody wants that. And we would have thought we dealt with something, and then 5 years later, boom, there it is. And you just have to patiently understand the depth of scars that are left by that kind of infidelity on a relationship, and trust that the Lord knows what he's doing, and there's nothing that he can't heal.
Yeah.
And but that doesn't mean like it's not like a overnight. I mean, we're real people with a real relationship that had to go through the ringer to get trust and kindness and freedom back between us. So it's been a long road, but we're in a really sweet season right now. And I honest to goodness, I could get on my face every single day still in gratitude for a God that like saw me as something else that I wasn't even close to being at that time.
Yeah.
Just he always knew who I was, and it was like he could see the longer vision of my life in a way that I would have laughed out loud about at that time.
Wow.
And now it's like, wow, who knew? I certainly didn't at the time, that how desperately real people who actually want to know God, how desperately people are to hear that their crap doesn't deter God from a vision for their life.
Yeah.
You know,
so good.
It doesn't disqualify you. There's no version of whatever you are right now or whatever you've been in the past that that God can't see past and can't heal past and can't bring you through. And that's one of my favorite things. That's one of my favorite messages to be the bearer of, because you don't want to hear that from some guy on a stage that has never lived anything, right? What you want is to hear that message from somebody who believes there's a God like that because they've experienced a God like that. So in that way, even though I'm a non-traditional, teacher in the church, to have a real story of redemption with Jesus that you're free enough to talk about is a very big deal.
It is.
To normal people. And because guess what? We're all out here living those kind of lives. That's the truth of it.
Yeah.
So it would be, you'd have to go a ways to get me to flinch. Like I've heard a lot, because people feel like they can let their guard down. They're like,
amazing.
oh. So yes, there might be a story out there that I'd have to take a deep breath listening to, but I don't know. I'm pretty like, yep, okay. So yeah, you're human like the rest of us. Sounds about right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And let me tell you what God can do with that.
Yes.
I just love, so listening to your story, Alli, I have so many, I'm sure listeners, I'm sure you're just like, I literally feel like I'm on the edge of my seat because I'm like, oh, and I love, like, thank you for painting the picture of you on the sidewalk, because it's just like, we get to kind of like see a glimpse into this, like, and you encountering God in such a beautiful and powerful way. And just realizing, and it's what you said, is just like one encounter can literally change everything, because you're like, yeah, you can't untell me that. Like, you can't take my experience of his goodness and his grace and his mercy and his love and the way he looked at me. Like, you can't take that away. And then just thinking, like you said, like his nearness and how it might have been the closest you've ever felt. I just kept thinking of how the word promises, like, he's close to the brokenhearted. And so I think sometimes we let guilt and shame come dig at us, like, well, not brokenhearted if you put it on yourself. You know what I mean? Like, that's like, oh, for those of you who somebody did something to you, but it's like, it could be your own mess you created, and he will still come near to you in it. That doesn't disqualify you. Like, nothing disqualifies you. Nothing can actually remove you from his love. Nothing can separate you. So I'm like, oh, it's just so, so beautiful and so powerful. So thank you. And then the other thing I loved that you shared, and it's so true, and oh my goodness, firsthand saying, you to be able to not only have lived this and maybe have, your small circle or your community, like, no, but to be able to shout it from the rooftops of like, God has saved me. He restored me. He changed my marriage. There's scars. We keep revisiting, like the freedom that comes in that to say, that he set us free for freedom, like that healing isn't linear. It is a journey. You're going to keep walking. You're going to keep finding more depths of freedom, because I worked at a church for years where there was a pastor on staff who it was like only the few of us knew that was part of their story. And all I could think is I was a really young, like minister in training and then became a pastor. So I was like in my early 20s. And I just remember thinking, this doesn't seem like the way it's supposed to be. Like, if we know this, like, why wouldn't that be like taught? Why wouldn't that be like, why is this a secret still? Like, it doesn't feel like freedom if this is still a secret that everybody's hush hush about. There must be layers of freedom that they still need. And so I love hearing you share your story of just like, there's so much freedom to be had.
Yes. And the word you just used, layers, is so appropriate, because with every new place and space that God would bring me into, I would think I was done. I'm good. I got enough freedom, and he's like, you're not free unless you're all the way free.
Yeah.
And I definitely think I talk often about how knowing you're forgiven and releasing the shame of your past are two very different things.
That's good.
And I knew fairly quickly that God forgave me. I believed that I was forgiven. And because I knew my repentance was real. Now it took people from the outside longer to believe that, but I knew that I was forgiven. I knew I had truly repented. I knew, in as much as it was up to me, I was never going to walk that way again, and that I was intent on following him. And so I believed that I was forgiven. I truly did. I did not know the extent to which shame, the layers and layers of shame, would try to come against me for many, many years to come. And that's what keeps you silent. And the church is so complicit in shaming people. And we're so desperately afraid. Here's what we are so afraid to tell the truth, because we're like, well, I mean, if the pastor had an affair, I guess everybody else out there is going to, it's like we're afraid to look our sin in the face, but the gospel requires it. Like, whoever that pastor was has this incredible weapon in his arsenal to go like, I know the God of redemption. And it may be that he knows he's forgiven. It may just be this other thing of shame that shuts him up. And that's exactly what the enemy does every single time. If he can't get you to stay in the life, then maybe you'll just believe you're not forgiven and unworthy. If you're forgiven and you're worthy again, maybe he'll just try that you should be ashamed of that. You should pay penance on that for the rest of your life. No, you shouldn't.
Right.
Have you heard the gospel? No, you are literally a new creation. You do not need to carry that around with you for the rest of your life. But unless we see that kind of freedom, we don't believe it. We buy this lie that we need to cover it all up and live in shame because we're trying to protect ourselves. And God is like, are you kidding me? I handled this. Like, come on. But it can be a very scary thing. And I think the platform that the Lord has allowed me to tell my story on has continued to increasingly free me. Because it was like, well, I'll tell my couple of good friends. Well, I guess I could do it in a small group setting. Well, maybe I could talk to, and boy, even this past weekend, I preached from the book of Acts about Paul, something else about Paul's life. But I was talking about how Paul tells his story. And I was like, listen, just a second here. This guy, he was a murderer, like a blasphemer. He was an unbelieving scoffer. He was putting Christians in jail. And I don't know who we think is supposed to spread the gospel except for people who have been bad enough to need it. So, it's kind of the one requirement the gospel has is you come in need as a sinner.
Right.
If you're unwilling to do that, then you cannot have the benefit of the gospel. It's like the one requirement is that you come before God in honesty and in need and ask him to make you someone new.
Mm.
I believe you can. I'll take what you're offering. Will you create in me a new heart? Will you make me a new creation? It's simple, but so many of us avoid it because of shame and pride and fear
Yeah.
and what we've been told we're supposed to be.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. Oh, well, thank you. Let's see. I want to wrap up this conversation with knowing that some listeners have clicked on this because they're like, oh, that's my story, or that's my friend's story, or wow, how do I prevent that from being my story?
Mm-hmm.
So, just some key questions that I think it sounds like
Sure.
you will go after for sure. I think what's unique too is, we've had a couple conversations and guests on, that were like from affairs and marital transgressions that were on the male side, not the female side.
Mm-hmm.
So as two women speaking, like I can think of like definitely even in my early years, I lived a life of promiscuity before I was saved. And so it's like my whole training was how to catch a guy, how to be flattered by getting somebody's attention. So as you were telling your story, I was like thinking, man, if I hadn't been in the bubble that I was in, I'm like, I could see how just something that would have felt very flattering or fun or whatever, like what was the root of that? Or what is something like,
Mm-hmm.
what is some advice you would give even just to wives or women that what was the hook? What was it that like kind of ensnared you in the beginning?
Yeah. Oh, this is, I think, a really common story or some version of it. But for me, it was, first of all, it was being attractive to someone. Like it was knowing that I even felt a sense of like, oh, this person responds to me. It's almost a sense of power. And I
Yeah.
would never have thought about it at the time, but it's very, it was very eye-opening to me. I think I said I was a little bit naive because I did not have a past in a lot of promiscuity. I just didn't. That wasn't my story. That wasn't who I was. So I think when I discovered this sense of my own beauty and my own attractiveness, more than external, but also external to somebody that responded like strongly to it, it was very surprising to me. It was
Mm-hmm.
very naive of me to not understand the kind of power that beauty really has. And that was definitely part of it. And then um, it was the desire to be known. I think if you're in a longer term relationship, especially, we can't stop desiring to know our partners because none of us are the same that we were a few years ago. We all want to continue to be known. And this person, I think, again, I've talked to many women who have known my story, and it is more unusual to have a woman talk about it. So you don't hear women say this a lot, but when a man wants to truly know you, shows that kind of interest in that emotional intimacy, really asks and listens, really wants to connect at that deeper level. That's what women are ensnared by.
Mm.
Yes, there is a percentage of women that are just after sex, but that is not most of the women that I have talked to. Most of them are ensnared by this desire they have to be truly known and deeply intimate with someone. So when a man comes to you, and I really don't mean sex. Sex is the outcome of the kind of intimacy that women are after.
Wow.
And so when you come to a woman and you want to know her and you're willing to ask and listen and spend the time connecting in that emotional, even intellectual space. Because for me, this was a person at work and I felt valued and respected by this person. Which is interesting because I often wonder how much of that was purposeful on his
Mm-hmm.
part.
Mm-hmm.
But it was about a layer of connection that my husband and I later discovered with the help of great counselors. Please go get a great counselor. None of us know how to
Yeah.
fix all our issues alone. Please do that. But with the help of a great counselor, we realized, oh, there's this whole layer of relationship called emotional intimacy that we were not caring for. We weren't really seeking to connect on some levels that this other person came in and offered.
Yeah.
And again, I was just blind to that. I didn't really even understand that. And so we could make then in your own marriage and in your own relationship, you can make a concerted effort to stay emotionally connected, emotionally intimate. And we discovered we suck at that. Like we both have these tendencies to kind of go task orientation, independence, I'll handle it myself. Like we just are very capable people.
Yeah.
And we've realized like, oh, that hurts our intimacy on another level. We just kind of go about life without each other. And all of a sudden,
Yeah.
we're not even asking interesting questions and curiosity about the other person. And you have to keep that alive because it will leave you in a very vulnerable space if you don't. Because somebody else will be. Somebody
Yeah.
else will walk in the door and want to know you because you are a beautiful, interesting, intelligent woman and somebody's going to be interested in that. So now and again, we still like we know this is not our strength, and so we work hard,
Yeah.
much harder than I wish we had to, but we do. We have to work hard at it.
Yeah.
But that's what I think women are very ensnared by that. I think men are highly visual. And so I was in a place in my life where I was really experimenting with the power and feeling of being beautiful and very naive about how that was going to land on men.
Yeah.
And so I think women are made to be beautiful. I love beauty. I think it's awesome. I don't think you need to cover it up or dumb it down. I just think you need to know what you're doing with it
Yeah.
because God made it to be very powerful. And so I just think we have to be wise to that impact on others and know what we're doing with it. I do not think the answer is dress in a paper bag,
Right.
and don't be beautiful. No, beauty's an incredible gift. I just think as women, we have to be very understanding and wise that it's power. It is power.
Wow. So good. Okay, here's another one. When you said when you were kind of in the middle of your mess and you were just like, I'm just going to tell the truth. It's like, that seems like the good idea. Something that I definitely learned through my life and the way I word it in my book is like create a culture of confession in your life where like my husband always says, what does he say? Like, there's no secret safe with your soul. Like you tell your soul there is no secret safe here. So knowing that was the trajectory that this experience set you on, I would just love for listeners to hear, like, because I just picture somebody being like, was it worth it? Like, when did it get too messy? Like, what is it meant and what has it looked like going forward in your life of just like, I tell the truth regardless of the consequence and the price I pay?
Yes. I'm so glad you asked that because I grew up in a family where saving people's feelings was more important than the truth.
Wow.
And that was very confusing. I'm a natural truth teller. One of the things that I learned about myself as I got to know Jesus was I'm a truth teller. So if you are a truth teller and you grow up in an environment where somebody says, don't tell the truth if it means hurting somebody, which was very much the culture that I grew up in. So that was very, I learned to lie. And I don't mean like insidious lies. I just mean I learned that the truth is not always the best thing. That's what I was explicitly taught growing up. And implicitly, I witnessed it many times. Well, if you're going to hurt somebody's feelings, just don't tell the truth. So in this, I love the phrase culture of confession. I love that. In my book, I talk about the word come. Jesus says, come to me. And we look at times where people came to Jesus and he wasn't satisfied until they were all the way there. And that's the same idea. When Jesus issues this invitation, and it's also a command, come to me, it means come to me, like all of you, all the way. And so same idea all throughout my book. And was it worth it? Oh, absolutely. But at the time, it ruined everything.
Yeah.
in my mind.
Right.
Like, in the stuff that was at stake at the time, telling the truth was what lit the fire that burned things down. But I'm telling you, the only stuff that stands in the end, which is where the title of my book comes from, How to Stay Standing. The only stuff that stands in the end is what you've built on him, and you can't build anything on him without the actual truth being in the foundation of it. So to me, I didn't really know this about myself at the time, but the way God has wired me is for that sense of like, if it's not real, I don't want it. If it's not the truth, what are we doing? Like, I just have this drive for what's real and true.
Yep.
And so I do think that helped, but I knew, when you're at the end of the road. I remember those moments where I was like, oh, holy crap, this is going to get real. Like, and you have to kind of force the words out of your mouth. I would do things like, this was a great, if you want to obey God and you can't make yourself do it, been there. I would like give him a date or a time, and I would go, okay, if you haven't allowed me like an easier way through this, when the clock hits 5, I'm just going to out with it. I'm just going to say it. Even as awkward as it is, or I'll say, okay, Lord, I'd like you to give me a natural way into this kind of confessing conversation or this difficult thing I need to tell someone or whatever. If you haven't, by Friday, I will have them on my calendar and we will have that conversation. So like, and sometimes he does and sometimes he doesn't, but it was that kind of thing. I just talked to him like he was real.
Yeah.
And I assumed that he could help me, and that sometimes what I read in the Bible, which is so deeply true, I didn't know how true at the time, but is that it's like a real repentance is usually turning around and walking straight back through the mess that you've made. It isn't often that God goes, okay, easy button, I'll just lift you out of this, because it's all the character formation stuff in going back through it that keeps you connected to him and keeps you needing him. And so I think for most of us, real repentance involves brutal honesty.
Yeah. Yep. Oh, it's so good. Okay. Last question is, I love that you spoke to how hard and messy it's been when you think you're done, when you think you're all the way free, when you think some part is all the way healed, but basically there's still a pain left over or some scar that is kind of resurfacing. I think that for me and my journey personally was one of the most painful things at moments, because I was just like, I remember crying in my bedroom with my husband once and being like, am I always going to have to go to counseling? Like, am I always going to have something to work on, to deal with? Like, is this just never going to stop? And so it even had moments of feeling like hopeless, I think, until you build that muscle enough of like, okay, I know what to do now. Like, I know how to surrender to God. I know how to go to counseling. Like, so you're like, okay, now I'm amped for this. Nothing's going to take me out. But for you to just share and speaking in your experience, and then especially and specifically with your husband, like, how has that looked? How has that felt? And then what would be like your advice to listeners that might be walking a similar journey of like how to keep going when you just feel hopeless and you want to throw in the towel?
Yes, absolutely. And yes, I have felt like that many times. I have struggled to feel completely healed in my sex life with my husband, because I carry those scars of like, this feels shameful sometimes. It feels like a space that's been ruined. These are the thoughts that would go through my mind in the past.
Yeah.
And I would feel like I can't enjoy this. I can't feel free in it because I have ruined this. Like I have done so much damage here. And to see the hurt that you've caused somebody else and the impact on them is just utterly devastating. So I think even that I realized was playing into avoiding sex sometimes because I didn't want to come face to face with the very place that I felt so ashamed and also so like I had hurt him so badly.
Yeah.
And so, gosh, I understand like deeply what it feels like. I would talk to God. You can tell that I talk to him a lot. He's probably like, would you shut up down there? Like, I already know what you're thinking. But I remember many times, truly for years, where I would talk to him and I would say, is this ever gonna is this ever gonna feel easy? Is it ever gonna feel fun? Is it ever gonna not feel like it could be something more? And the truth is, I hate to say it like this, but it does not get fixed overnight. And I would those exact moments, it took me years to understand this because I was so afraid of it. Those exact moments are the moments that if I share them with my husband, they create the intimacy that we're looking for. Like I thought, I need to not burden him further in the space where I've already hurt him. But in sharing that fear or that shame or that angst over the past, the sharing of that actually creates the intimacy that it has stolen.
Wow.
And I didn't get that for so long. I thought it was my job to just do this, just handle it. This was your problem, your sin, your darkness, and now you get to live with it, right? And I just thought it was my kind of cross to bear, if you will. Like, this is just never gonna, and it's still hard and scary sometimes to say what we're actually thinking and feeling, even to the people that love us. But I've learned, oh, wow, it's in the confession of that. Speaking of a culture of confession, when you say the scary thing to your spouse in that space, suddenly you're in the middle of the intimacy that you're missing. And it's still hard for me. It's still hard for me because what I have this understanding that it was harmed and it should have been something better and more beautiful. And that is actually true. And I hate that that's true, but it's actually true. And so instead, it feels like we've had to fight our way through a mess that I then blame myself for making. And it's fraught. I'm telling you, it's fraught with crap. But as I've learned to come like in vulnerability to my husband and just go like, I'm afraid that you are angry with me, every time we're together. I'm afraid that you're thinking about this thing, or I'm afraid that you're feeling this certain way, because my assumptions, by the way, were almost never correct.
Wow.
But it would open up intimacy that we couldn't get to any other way, and we still stink at it. Like, it's still hard and it's still scary to be vulnerable and to say some of those really hard things.
Yeah.
And also, I think we've made our peace. And you're talking to somebody who believes Jesus can heal absolutely anything to the max. And I've made my peace that sometimes on this side of heaven, there are things that will always feel like a struggle, and his grace is sufficient for me.
Yeah.
His grace is enough. Every time we've thought, that's it, we're not coming back from this, like it's just too hard, it's like he's reached down and grabbed it by the throat and pulled it back again. And I wish all those scars were gone. I wish we'd had the beauty we should have had from the beginning. I wish our sex life had never been through any kind of difficulty, and that it was a place of perfect intimacy, and that's just not true. And I wish it was, but it's not.
Wow. Thank you so much. Thank you for being so transparent and raw and vulnerable and sharing your freedom with us, the redemption story. I feel like definitely we've walked the journey with you, and it's been so powerful. Can you tell everybody listening, because I'm sure we're at the hour mark, so I'm like, I know we have to wrap up, but I'm sure they're like, wait, I want more. So can you tell them how to find you, how to find your book, how to hear more?
Sure, absolutely. I do write a little bit about the story and then what I saw and learned of Jesus out of it. And in my book that released in January of this year, it's called How to Stay Standing. And it really is about discovering some of the things that Jesus teaches about, but discovering it in my real life and how to have a faith that can take a hit, how to have a life that can take a hit because they're coming, whether we want them or not. And so, How to Stay Standing, you can get anywhere books are sold. I mean, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Target, any Christian book outlet, anything like that. You can find me on social media, on Facebook and Instagram, as well as on my website. And it's all the same, The Alli Patterson, The Alli Patterson. And Alli is Alli. So The Alli Patterson on Instagram, Facebook, or my website.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And we'll be sure, you guys, to link in the show notes where to find Alli's book and her websites and her Instagram. So, Alli, thank you so much. And something I just remembered, because you said it and we say it all the time, but you're like, find a good counselor. Just today, I was texting with our counselor friend who has a counseling network. Listeners who are loyal, you are familiar, Deborah Fileta. She's been on our podcast and in our different courses before, but she has just recently started the Counseling Network so that you can find online Christian faith-filled counselors that are going to go towards faith and psychology. And they just gave us a little discount code for listeners. If you put in Moral Rev 10, you get 10% off your first session, which I know sometimes the biggest roadblock can feel like it's finances. That's definitely part of our story with counseling and why it took us so long to get into it. So let that be a little help to you of finding a Christian counselor wherever you live around the world. And I agree with Alli. Find a good counselor. I mean, there's so many messes that we can't even see past, but that we just need somebody to come in and give us some clarity and help us walk through it. So, Alli, thanks for your time. You guys be sure to get her book, How to Stay Standing, and connect with her. And we'll see you next time on Let's Talk About It.
Thank you guys for listening. If you want to learn more and check out all of our awesome content, be sure to head to our website at moralrevolution.com and our socials, Instagram, Facebook, all of them. But before you leave, don't forget to like, review, subscribe, all of the things. We want you guys to come back and join us. We enjoyed having you. See you next time.